Rallying. For the ardent fans, a few unforgettable seconds of excitement. For the drivers, the ultimate test of their skill, courage and stamina. For the cars, an unrelenting struggle with the world's toughest terrain.
Quite why rallying is so popular, and why it's so popular almost to the extent that in some countries spectators are still a problem. We could do with it almost being less popular in some countries. I don't really know. There's got to be an element of masochism. Cars throw stones at you and you see them for all of 5 seconds. It's like going to Wimbledon or to the British Grand Prix and getting stuck in a traffic jam. It's almost the Dunkirk spirit. There's that element.
Rallies can last for days, but drivers will battle to gain a few fractions of a second over their rivals. Winning a big rally in this hard world adds luster to even the best-known showroom names.
There's nearer, my God, to thee. The cars are closer to the cars they run themselves. The drivers are still closer to the general public.
The rewards for success in rallying are sweet. A lifestyle to compensate for the sport's discomforts. While many try, only a few men and women have the skills to reach the top, where modern rallying is a big and flourishing business. But like so much of motorsport, it started out as the pastime of amateurs. Today's rallies can trace part of their origin to a pre-war event known in Britain as the Reliability Run. The car clubs which organised these runs chose routes designed to test the strengths and weaknesses of the cars. Though they were light-hearted occasions for the participants, for the manufacturers there was a serious side, a chance to observe how their cars performed.
They were very, very important indeed for giving a car a good name, you might say, because reliability was probably one of the most important things, if not the most important, when cars started. Consequently, I mean, there were wonderful testing grounds for your car. I mean, there weren't all the sophisticated testing arrangements that there are now. There were quite a few hybrids that used to turn up, and people would experiment with this. In fact, we tried all kinds of things. I can remember filling tyres with water once, and it was absolute disaster because it went round like a bob weight. You couldn't fill them completely with water. The hills were all different conditions. Locals had a habit of doctoring certain hills just to make it more fun for them to spectate. You know, they'd like to see somebody drop into a load of cow mess and something like that. You know.
Demonstrating driving skill has always played an important part in rallying. The Monte Carlo rally, the longest established and most famous event of them all, always ended on the promenade with a test designed to show that the driver had full mastery of the car. Women took part as well as men, and although there were special prizes for women, all drivers had to match their skills and their cars against some of the harshest terrain in Europe. The attraction of the Monte Carlo rally has always been the challenge of driving against the elements, in particular the ice and snow of the Alps. The rally had one unusual feature. Competitors started from all over Europe and took different routes to Monte Carlo. It was still an expedition as well as an adventure. There were few facilities for the motorists en route. Competitors had to be self-sufficient. They fitted their cars with all sorts of gadgets, some to counter the harsh conditions, others to make the trip as comfortable as possible for the drivers. It was a well-mannered affair, but only up to a point.
Men always think that they can drive much better than a lady, and so all the time you're sort of having to prove to them that this is not true, because there were very few ladies, and there's not much fun just beating the ladies, you want to beat the men.
When I started rallying in the 50s, of course, there was no such thing as practice or pace notes or anything. We used to go to a rally no service, with, say, 2 spare wheels, a fan belt, set of brakes, pads later, and of course linings before, shock absorbers maybe, spare can of petrol because there weren't too many petrol stations about, and we'd go off and do it.
Some competitors started from Scotland, completing part of the route in Britain before crossing the Channel to France. But from wherever they started, all had to share the Monte's ultimate challenge, the route over the Alps.
On one of the world's most scenic and most difficult highways, the final leg of the supreme test of sheer driving skill, the Monte Carlo Rally. From a dozen different cities all over the continent, the cars converge on the Principality, all taking the same hair-raising route over the Alps in the home stretch.
Rallying in the 50s and 60s was less expensive because the cars were much closer to standard. The sort of cars I would be rallying on a Saturday would go back into the showroom on a Sunday or be the dealer's demonstrator on the Monday.
The annual event is always something of a shocker to the quiet mountain villages along the way.
Once you get onto the common route, you're in the mountains then, and of course normally you're in snow. Well, any one of them is hazardous when you're trying to go a bit too fast on a slippery road up in the mountain.
Over 357 miles of winding, twisting, icy, treacherous road, racing the clock and fighting to keep within a complex set of speed and safety rules.
Monte, of course, was on snow, and in the old days we didn't have studded tyres or anything. It was very dicey indeed, down the hairpins, with no stud.
On one Monte Carlo rally, we were going down one of the very difficult mountain stages on ice and snow at about 70 miles an hour. And I was holding my breath and thinking, what on earth am I doing here? Why am I here? I should be at home. I've got 3 children. I should be at home.
The difficulties and dangers of the frozen alpine roads gave the Monte Carlo its special place in rallying history. Even without snow and ice, the Alps offered a formidable challenge, an ideal environment for a rally, testing driving skill to the limit. Another of the great international events in the 1950s was the Coupe des Alpes, which took place in the July sunshine.
The Alpine was always summer, and that was the lovely rally to do. We all loved that because it was in the south of France, the start and finish. And you used to have a rest day, 2 rest days in the rally at lovely places like Cortina or somewhere really nice, so you could relax for 24 hours and swim. And it was a great rally as well.
The Alpine Rally was a duel between car and mountains, with speed thrown in to add to the excitement. Average speeds in the Alpine Rally were high. The roads were demanding and sometimes in poor condition. There were difficult passes like the Stelvio. The Stelvio had 58 hairpin bends in 25 kilometers and was covered as a special stage which drivers had to take as fast as possible. To add to the difficulties, the roads were not closed, so competitors had to adjust their speed to take account of ordinary road users.
We were so near winning an Alpine Cup so many times, and then something seemed to go wrong almost at the last minute.
Anne Hall drove for the Ford Works team.
We were almost at the end, and suddenly I applied the brakes, and the brakes weren't good enough to hold back the car with the power that we had. And it slid, and it slid, and we went straight over the edge of the mountain. We really should have been killed. But luckily there was a huge, huge rock, and we just rested on the rock, and we teetered backwards and forwards on this rock.
As rallies became more competitive, rally drivers looked for faster cars. Some drivers found one in the Austin Healey 3000, a sports car which evoked the spirit of the time.
The Healey, I think every driver who drove it was frightened of it. They held the road very well on dry tarmac, but if you hit some gravel or sand, let alone ice or snow, it wasn't very funny. Of course, they were very front heavy. They had 200 horsepower approximately at the end. They were very difficult, but we thought they were great because they were fast.
As the 50s drew to a close, rallying at the top level began to change. While always competitive, at heart it had been an amateur affair. Now it was to become a full-time professional sport, which demanded constant practice.
The organisers seemed to have the knack of giving you just enough time, your class of car, to do the stage with a minute to spare, if you're lucky. There were certain stages where you had to drive absolutely flat out to wind up at the control with seconds to spare. They'd just make it possible, but if you drove every section that hard, you'd break the car, it would never last. We had knock-off switches on the brake lights. Now if somebody got up behind me, and of course if they'd take driving off your brake lights and off you through a road that's wiggling through a mountain, their lights make it difficult for you to see. And secondly, they can brake where you're braking, so they've got an advantage. So what we used to do after a while was to let them get used to it, and then all of a sudden, when a real good 90-degree one comes up, just knock the brake lights off. And they didn't go off the road, but it used to upset them quite a bit, and then you didn't have any more trouble.
Increased professionalism and increased speed made rallying more attractive to spectators. The final stages of the Alpine Rally were virtually short road races and exciting to watch, and so manufacturers used rallying more and more to promote their cars. Rallying was shedding its old-world gentlemanly traditions. The sporting bonhomie gave way to a brasher, more aggressive commercial approach. Winning at all costs became the objective. New works teams joined the fray. Rallying was growing, and so was its competitiveness.
Maybe over brow, and flat brow, 100, down and up. Caution, flat right over brow, 70, mud, slippy. Absolute right over brow, 70.
Today's rally car has come a long way since the amateur days of the Monty. This Mazda may look like a sporty version of the company's saloon car. In fact, it's been specially built for the job. Nothing has been left to chance. The body shell has been strengthened, the engine has been specially prepared, and the car is packed with the latest technology.
Flat brow, 80.
Success depends on a high level of teamwork between the driver and co-driver. In the 1950s, drivers and co-drivers had to do almost everything for themselves, from plotting the route to looking after the car. Co-drivers were the jacks of all trades. They had to maintain the car and fill it up from garages along the way. They carried money to pay for the petrol and anything else the car might need. But as the sport grew more professional, their main task became interpreting the pace notes which described every section of the route.
Long flat right, and it's a hairpin left. Interesting straight.
Knowing exactly what was ahead was the only way the driver could maintain the speeds needed to complete a section on time.
Yep. Quick left.
It was self-preservation as well as the desire to beat the competition that really instigated the formation of pace notes. We had a huge accident on the Acropolis Rally in Greece where we flew off the road in an Austin Healey 3000. It was before the days of seat belts. We were both thrown out, and luckily Peter was only slightly injured. I landed on the only patch of grass within 3 square miles, and the car rolled down the mountainside and destroyed itself completely.
Pace notes were prepared during practice. Their accuracy was all important.
A section on the Col de Turini, on the Monte Carlo Rally, would go something like this: 100, hairpin right, 300. Now that isn't 300 yards or 300 meters. That just tells the driver that there's a very long straight following a slow bend, so that gives him plenty of time to position his car correctly and to get it into the right gear and perhaps put it sideways before he comes to a fast left which opens out into a hairpin left. And then another 300, again a long straight, but at the end of that there is a right max and fast left over a crest.
And I mean, can you imagine coming up to a brow in the road and the co-driver says to you it's flat out and it looks like you're going to go over a cliff? I mean, it does make a hell of a difference. It makes at least 10%, maybe even up to nearly 20% difference in the speed you can go.
International rallying moved up a gear with the arrival of Scandinavia's star drivers. Their driving skills had been developed in the harsh conditions of the north. They knew how to drive fast on rough roads, the key to victory. One of the first was Erik-Karlsson, who drove a Saab. Then came Hannu Mikkola and Timo Mäkinen.
In Scandinavia in those days, a good rally driver was more praised than a good footballer. And therefore, every Scandinavian wanted to become a good rally driver because you were a hero of the country. I mean, you could do what you liked. You were given freedom of the city, whatever it was.
The Scandinavians taught the next generation of rally drivers how it should be done.
They came over with unusual driving techniques, experimenting, for instance, by putting the left foot on the brake to try and pivot the back of the car around while they kept the right foot on the accelerator. They did incidentally change gear without using the clutch because they weren't paying for the gearboxes.
Keep it out and put it second gear, out any clutch. I'm using left foot braking.
If you use left foot braking, it is much safer. You can go faster and you can get away with more.
Full power, second gear.
If you went into a corner too quickly, if you left foot braked, if you kept the power on at the same time, the two front wheels kept turning so you could control the car better. I didn't do it anyway, so I went off the road quite often, but or maybe not so fast.
As well as professional teams and new driving techniques, rallying now discovered a revolutionary car, the Mini. One of the first to appreciate its potential was Paddy Hopkirk.
One great thing about the Mini is so small that a narrow road looks like a big road to it. So in the Monte Carlo Rally, I mean, I remember with snowbanks on either side, the car, you could actually get the car more sideways than a big car. So the Mini could really perform in those narrow lanes.
The brave new world ushered in by the Minis and the Works teams met the old guard of rallying on the Monte Carlo in 1961. On their first outing, they were beaten by Karlsson in a Saab. Then in 1964, Paddy Hopkirk won it in a Mini. Timo Mäkinen did the same in 1965. In 1966, Minis came first, second and third. It was too much for the organisers.
The French were so astounded by the Mini's performance and winning the Monte Carlo Rally for the third time that they didn't believe that we weren't cheating. The thing is, they actually counted all the teeth in the gear wheels and the gearbox. They took the tires off the wheels and weighed the wheels, weighed the tires separately. I mean, it was ridiculous. They couldn't find anything wrong. And they eventually disqualified us on the lights we were dipping onto spotlights, which was technically illegal, but didn't help us to win the rally. So they disqualified us 1, 2, 3, and of course that gave the Mini 10 times as much publicity as if we'd won the rally, because the whole world was saying the French are at it again and not playing the ball.
Rally drivers have always looked for a new challenge away from the regulated roads and crowded urban areas of Europe. A place where they can pit their cars and skills against even tougher terrain. They found one such challenge on the long deserted roads of the African bush in the Safari Rally in Kenya.
I think for us
European drivers, we are so used to drive flat out in every rally in Europe that most difficult is just to find the speed that car will hold all these 5,000 kilometers, and not to drive 100%, we have to find the right speed, not to drive too slow to be the second, but not to drive too fast to break the car. That's the most difficult thing.
The Safari Rally was originally organised for local enthusiasts, but it wasn't long before European drivers discovered its attractions.
The Safari Rally is the big event of the Easter holidays in Kenya. Everybody in the country is interested. People come from hundreds of miles to watch it being run in their particular areas. My navigator had to be chosen from someone who lived out there because it was very essential that they spoke Swahili, because the areas that we covered were areas where nobody ever travelled. The only people that were there were virtually the natives and missionaries. You had everything that could be thrown at you, plus animals. The Safari, besides being a wonderful rally, obviously has these terrible hazards. You have bridges with no sides. You're rushing down a hill, and we went over a little concrete bridge, which was about 6 inches wider each side than the car. If you slid, you were off. We ran into red mud, and we just ran in and straight out again, not badly. But suddenly the car wouldn't steer after a very short period of time. The mud had set inside the wheel, and it was like iron almost. We had to stop, get a hammer, and chisel all the mud out from the wheel before we could carry on.
There are some things that just can't be anticipated.
Peter Jop's Hillman Husky is soon to retire when his co-driver, Jungle Jim Alexander, succumbs to an insect bite. Too much scenery and too little time. Too much dust, too. By now, the cars are carrying loads of it.
The dust was unbelievable, it really was. It would come up the door pillars and get into the roof lining. So when you hit a big bump, you'd get this red mist coming down. The front suspension just broke, just fell apart. I'd have to stop and tighten it up. Well, we took it in turns, and I got out on one occasion, and because you're lying flat on your back with your feet into the bush at the side, and I could hear something moving very close, and I got back in that car so fast it wasn't true.
Once in Safari we went so deep water that all the lights were under the water, and actually the water was coming over the windscreen, and I can tell you that's a funny feeling, because you can see all this light in the water actually, and you just trust your nose that in 10 meters it will be over, you know. And rallying that's why so interesting, because you never really know what you are going to get.
The car against the elements is an enduring theme in rallying. The engineers are constantly seeking to improve a car's performance, using the latest technology to master rally's unrelenting roads. In the 1970s, another revolutionary car appeared when Audi introduced four-wheel drive.
It was a really exciting time, because I think we were the first ones to use the four-wheel drive concept, and it was so many things that nobody really knew. With the rear-wheel drive cars, we could use maybe 300 horsepower, but then it was just spinning, and the rear tires was just finished after 2-3 kilometers. But four-wheel drive car, then we could go up to 550 horsepower and still get good grip and not too much wheel speed. Also, when you are sideways, four-wheel drive car, it's always pulling with the four wheels inside of the pen, so the speed is higher. Then you can use the snowbanks. If you are sliding a little bit wide or you drive a little bit too fast, you can always lean a little bit the snow wall, and it doesn't matter so much.
Audi's success ushered in a new, even more competitive era in Europe. It was a battle between manufacturers to be the top name in the sport. Peugeot joined the contest with a remarkable car, the 205 Turbo 16, built specifically for rallying. It had four-wheel drive, was mid-engined, following the example of Formula One and sports cars, and was turbocharged. The team had to be backed up by a complex servicing operation, often in the middle of nowhere. But the investment was worth it. Peugeot was soon in the top class of rallying, and sales of the 205 soared.
It was like a copybook example what the manufacturer can do in rallying, how they can start from scratch, how they can be successful, and how we can help the rest of the factory to make a remarkable turnaround in the financial terms. And having been involved in the middle of it right from the start was very, very rewarding, not only as a driver, but you felt you were part of the big project and really contributing.
Companies now had to pay heavily to join in the game, and even more to win. The best drivers cost a lot. So did investment in engineering. But the biggest commitment came in team support, in backing up the drivers with mechanics, vehicles to move them about, helicopters, and spare parts.
A team will go into the Monte Carlo rally as the classic example, and will think in terms of 1,000 wheels and tyres. 1,000. That's per car, not for the team. So if you've got 3 cars, 3,000 wheels and tyres. You don't use them all, of course. But if you've got special stages spread across France, and you're not sure that the tyre vehicles will be able to move around because of the weather, then you've got to have, if there are 8 different sorts of tyres, you've got to have 8 sets here, 8 sets here, 8 sets, and so on, and very quickly permutate up to 1,000. Quite absurd.
Despite the costs, more and more manufacturers are participating. The latest recruits are the Japanese giants Toyota, Mazda and Mitsubishi. Rallying flourishes. The challenge of car and driver competing against the elements is still compulsive. That's why fans will endure any conditions to share a few exhilarating seconds of the sport's excitement.
We're reaching the stage now that we're seeing on rallies results after a day's rallying closer between the top 10 than after an hour and a half Formula 1. It's amazing.